Hi, friends. Hi, welcome back. I hope you're here for another lesson. Today, our lesson is on an ELA topic with writing and combining some reading skills that we have learned. Do you remember this word we talked about? Central message. Okay. Miss Gaylord often makes these webs, and this is a thing we're going to do today before we do some writing skills, okay? Central messages, determining the central message will help you know what is the most important thing in the story, and the central message is what the story tells you at the end of the story. So, what are some things that you remember about the word central message? Okay. The central message is very similar to this word, the theme of a story. Okay. A central message may also be like the lesson learned in the story. Would a central message be a detail or more of a main idea? Okay, more of a main idea. Very good. Okay, so let's look at these words, these reading words that we've covered this year, and talk about a story here. Okay, so knowing what important events happen in a story can help you figure out the central meaning of the story. Okay, so I'm going to read a story that you may have heard before. It's a fable. Remember how we took a couple of story types and we talked about them. One was a fable. Okay. We talked right at the end there. And when I was doing the lessons the last couple of weeks, we read a couple from Aesop's fables. And usually a fable has a meaning at the end or a lesson learned. And that's what I'm going to do. This one's called The Blue Coyote. Long ago, there lived a hungry coyote. One day, he found a juicy bone. He grabbed it and ran away. When he jumped the fence, he landed in a big tub that was filled with blue ink. Now his fur had been turned bright blue. The coyote went into the forest, and the animals had never seen such a strange blue creature before. They were scared. They ran away from him. The sneaky coyote thought of a plan to make the animals give him all the food that he wanted. He told the animals he was their new king. They believed him. They also brought him all the food that he wanted. One night he heard the coyotes howling at the moon, and he could not stop himself, for he howled too. When all the other animals heard him, they knew he had been teasing them all along. He was a coyote himself, just another coyote. They were being tricked. And they chased that bright blue coyote right out of the woods. If you had to look at that story and tell me the most important events, let's talk about 3, okay, before we determine the central message of that. Let's take this and divide it into 3 different events, okay? How does the blue coyote become blue? That's the first one. Remember? What did he do to become blue? After, remember, he was getting that bone, he falls into a tub of blue ink. Okay, now that's a detail of the story, not the main idea. One of the things that happened in the story is also a story part, but it's not the main idea. Why do the animals in the story bring him food? Why did they bring him food? How does he get them to bring them food? Do you remember? What do they think he is? They think he is a king. Okay. Why does the blue coyote, another detail in the story, why does he start howling at the end? he is a coyote, right? And what do coyotes do? They can't help themselves, right? They howl at the moon. Coyotes howl. Now, all three of these things are details. They are important events in the story. They lead up to the central message. Let's talk about them again. He falls in a tub of blue ink. The other animals think he is a king. And he howls at the moon because that's what coyotes do, right? That's what coyotes do. In this story, if you had to look and talk about the setting of the story, where is the setting? Where does the story take place? The story takes place in a forest. Who would you say is the main character of this story? The coyote. Very good. Now, what would you say that if you had to say that this story was mostly about? It's mostly about a blue coyote that tries to trick the other animals right in the forest. Okay, very good. Okay, what do you think maybe a lesson learned from this story would be? A lesson learned. Always tell the truth because it'll come back to get you, right? In the end. Okay. Now, what I want to do today is take your own story and I want you to come up with your own central message from a story. Now, Miss Gaylord has a little fun way. She brought a bag of story cubes today to look at. Okay. In this little game, you can take out the cubes and you write your own story depending on what comes up on your cube. So you roll them like a dice, and whatever item comes up on the cube, you use that in your story. So today we're going to kind of talk about some writing skills. Before we write, let's do what we call pre-write. What are some things that you might want to think about before you write? Okay, so before we write, let's talk about what we want to do. Let's look at the directions. Roll the cubes and look at the face-up image. When you pick an image or a picture that you get, you use that to start your story. We're going to choose a tale, like a fairy tale. Do you remember when we covered the fairy tales in our unit? What were some of the characteristics of a fairy tale? They often begin with what words? Once upon a time, right? There's often what else in fairy tales? Sometimes royalty, okay? Kings, queens, princesses, princes. Good, okay? At the end, we're going to put a lesson learned. We're going to have a central message in our story. Now, your story can be on anything that you want it to be on this week. I'm just going to start you here with my cubes and see if you can add to your story, okay? So, I'm going to take a couple of the cubes and I'm going to take 3. And I want to roll them and I want you to use 3 things with your story parts, okay? All right, so what are the 3 parts of a good story? Do you remember? I'm going to abbreviate. Beginning, middle, and end. Okay. In the end of the story, we'll come up with the central message that you want to have shared here, okay? All right, so I roll my cubes, and here's something that I got. Okay, I got this one, a rainbow for 1. Okay. I got this one, a castle. Okay, and then I rolled my 3rd one. Let's see if I can get it to come up. Okay, and I got a turtle. turtle. So my three parts in my story, I'm going to have to name a rainbow, a castle, and a turtle. Okay, so let's look at the beginning of the story. And let's talk about, by using what we call this web, the story web, what we want our story to be about. Okay, remember? We create our topic, and I'm going to put it in the middle. Okay, if it's going to be a fairy tale, maybe it's going to be about a princess or a prince. Okay, you might want to put that in the middle. I hope you have out your paper and that you have, so you can write this diagram down. Now, these are your ideas, not mine. So and the ELA Google Classroom, you need to submit whatever's there with your ideas, not mine. But this is just a guide. Okay, so put your topic, what you want your story to be about. Okay. Put that in the middle, and then we're going to make a web from that. What are some things that can happen in your story? Well, we need to use a turtle, and we need to use a rainbow with this story. Okay, now you can come up with your own three things at home. You do not have to write. If you want to use my three things, castle, turtle, and rainbow, you can, but you don't have to. Okay, so some things that are going to happen in my story. My story is going to be about a princess, so I would put that here. Okay, I'm going to erase the word topic, and I'm going to put my story is going to be about a princess. Okay, in my story, my princess finds a turtle. Okay, in my story, my princess sees a rainbow. Okay, in my story, my princess lives in a castle. It's important that I write about all three of these things: castle, turtle, and rainbow. The other things in my story are going to be in your mind, your details, okay? All right, so in the beginning of the story, I want to introduce you to my character. So I'm going to start my story out with the words, once upon a time, there lived a princess. Her name was whatever, okay? Bella. Bella liked to go outside. She loved animals. I would continue to write that in my beginning. I get to my middle part of the story and I write, Bella was out one day walking in the forest and she found a turtle. Do you remember when we studied fairy tales? What do the animals often do in the fairy tales? They can what? Talk, okay? The turtle asked the princess if she had anything that she would like to wish for. Bella said she had a wish she'd like to wish for. She wished for a friend. She needed a good friend. Okay. Then I can continue my story about that. Now she has mentioned the castle where she lives in the first part. It's mentioned that she has found a turtle. And I need to mention the rainbow, okay? Somewhere in the next part of the story, okay? The turtle has asked Bella what she would like to wish for. Bella says, I wish for a good friend. About that time, she saw a rainbow in the sky. Okay, so that would be toward my ending. About that time, she saw a rainbow in the sky. Out of the rainbow flew a dove. The dove came to Bella and could speak and said, hello, will you be my friend? And then the story ends with the two of them being friends, Bella and her new friend, the dove that she found, okay? Now I've got a beginning, a middle, and an end to my story. What is often important that you write in the beginning of a paragraph? A what? A topic sentence, okay? So when you're writing your story, make sure that you start with something that's going to capture the reader's attention. I started mine with once upon a time. And then I'm going to find all the story parts that I need to add. I'm going to add a beginning, a middle, and end. Now, when we talked about good stories, do good stories often have just everything easy and simple? No, a good story often has a problem. We have found that as we looked at story parts, there's often a problem that has to be what? Solved. Okay. So you might want to think about that as you go about writing your story as well. Okay. All right. So now, oftentimes we talked about several types of things. We talked about fairy tales today and fables. Some other reading passages we covered this year were your tall tales. Remember Paul Bunyan? Remember that one? And we talked about, let's see, other reading passages. What's a reading passage that is the story of a person's life? A biography. We talked about biographies. We also talked about two types of works. What is a work type called that is not true, that is made up? It's called what? Fiction. We talked about works that are true, that are not made up, and those are called nonfiction works. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to look at is I want to know, in our story, you have to develop a character. Who was the main character in the story that Miss Gaylor just shared with you? Bella, right? The princess, okay? One thing that you need to remember is how characters act in a story. We talked about that as well. Now, characters are in the story are people or either animals or something in the story that faces a challenge. A challenge is a problem that needs to be solved. Just describing how characters respond to challenges will help you get to know them better. Okay. Do you remember what Miss Gaylor just shared to you the challenge was for Bella? What was the challenge? She needed a what? A friend. She needed a friend. Okay. Everybody needs a friend, right? She needed a friend. And we learned, now I didn't have time to develop that story very much. It was just quickly off the top of my head. But the way characters respond in a story often also tells you about them as well. Okay. So as you are beginning to write yours, I want you to write your story and submit it to me under the ELA Google Classroom. And I want you can do what Miss Gaylor did, come up with 3 things that you want. Maybe you don't have these little story cubes, but you can often think, what are 3 things I want to mention in my story? And come up with those. Come up with your own web before you start. Get some ideas together before you put them on paper. Come up with the beginning, middle, and end chart and see how you want it to play out in the story. And then try to develop your story into a couple of paragraphs before you submit it, okay? A good storyteller often has, remember, a challenge for the main character. Now, don't forget to share your ending with me, okay? And submit that under the Google Classroom. Thank you for this writing lesson that you observed today, and I hope that you come back each day as we're continuing to review skills that you guys learned this year. Don't forget to go to your iReady reading and complete your 20 minutes each day or 80 minutes by the end of the week. There are some things for reading fluency that are in the material section of your Google Classroom. There's some things that have been written, the one on apple picking. There's 3 that I submitted yesterday that you guys can look at. Remember those stories we talked about, sharpshooter and the others. Read them every day, and by the end of the week, your reading skills should be showing that you can read the passages in less and less time. Okay, continue to practice, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.